Hello and welcome to the Undressing the Spirit podcast, where sex and spirit go hand in hand. Join me, Tamara Powell, on a no-holds-barred adventure into the psyche and beyond every conceivable limit. Welcome back to Undressing the Spirit. My guest today is Emma Schmidt. Emma is a licensed professional counselor, certified sex therapist, and certified clinical sex addiction specialist. So I'm sure you can already see why I was super excited to book her for the show. Emma earned her Master of Arts in Counseling from Cincinnati Christian University and went on to receive her training in sex therapy through the Institute for Sexual Wholeness. And she's certified through the American Board of Christian Sex Therapists, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, as well as the International Association of Certified Sexual Addiction Specialists. Whew, that was a mouthful, Emma. Emma earned her Master of Art in Counseling from Cincinnati Christian University and went on to receive her training in sex therapy through the Institute for Sexual Wholeness and is certified through the American Board of Christian Sex Therapists, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, as well as the International Association of Certified Sexual Addiction Specialists, which trains clinicians in the trauma model of therapy from a Christian perspective, if you're not familiar. Emma also has 2 years of doctoral experience from Union Institute and University. Her group practice, Emma Schmidt and Associates, provides a whole range of therapeutic services in the Cincinnati, Ohio area and also online. Emma, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So excited to have you. Yeah. I was just on your website and I hope my listeners go on it. It is one of the most beautiful therapeutic websites I've seen.
Oh,
seriously.
Thank you. My husband designed it. We were trying to save money and he comes home from working all day and then works on the website. So I have a great partner.
Fantastic. Kudos to him. Yes, well done. I have seen a lot in my day, as I'm sure you have too. And there's some scary ones out there. Yours is gorgeous.
Oh, yours is too. I love the artwork. It's just so creative. And it just brings you in, which is... Yeah, I love.
Thank you.
I agree. A good website and it's important.
It's important, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So tell our listeners how you came into this beautiful paradox, much like myself, of bridging the gap between spirituality and sexuality, and a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. So I've been always interested in human sexuality growing up. And whenever I went to school, Cincinnati Christian University, I knew I wanted to do something in the psychology field. I actually went to school to be a missionary.
Wow.
But when I was there, I realized I really was interested in helping people, psychology, rape crisis center type of field. But as I was going through my undergrad, I realized that the topic of sexuality or human sexuality wasn't talked about, and it was actually seen as something that was somewhat shameful or... you weren't allowed to talk about it. There was just a lot of discussion around the certain verbiage that you were and weren't allowed to use. And so I found that a lot of my friends in undergrad were embarrassed to talk about this topic. And when I brought it up, I found that I was really interested in researching different parts in their life that they were going through to help them kind of flourish in their sexuality or some kind of sexual concern that they were going through. And so that really propelled me into wanting to understand more about the field and provide help for people in general around going through sexual concerns, but really for the Christian environment, for people who have a spiritual upbringing, who feel like I don't know how to understand my body from a sexual component or access that part. And how do I do that then whenever I'm in a relationship, dating, when I'm trying to abstain, but then also whenever I get married, how do I access that when I've somewhat suppressed it or repressed it? So that helped kind of push me into the field, and I've been loving it ever since. It's so great to feel like creating a need for community.
Yes. I love your journey. It so overlaps my own. I grew up in a Protestant denomination called Assemblies of God. And depending upon where we were at in the world, certain pastors were more progressive with it than others. And while my parents were pretty open about sex and still from their worldview, saving yourself for marriage, but that it was a wonderful thing within, the marriage covenant. Not a lot of my friends got that. And when I started teaching small groups in the church, it quickly became so apparent that so many women had a lot of stigma and shame, and as you pointed out, like misinformation about their bodies and how the sexual reproductive cycle works. And it's something that, like you, just really intrigued me. Like, who's going to bridge the gap for these people? How do we have, sexually informed but biblically informed conversations that would allow individuals and couples to explore what needs to be explored?
Exactly. Yeah, this church that I go to now, the pastor actually had me come and do a co-speaking engagement with him on a Sunday morning. And this place is 30,000 members. So it was a great exposure. And I was like, can I talk about toys? Am I allowed to talk about masturbation? And he's like, yes, these people have these questions. They're wondering the same thing. Please talk about it. And it was so nice to be able to normalize the conversation from a spiritual perspective and be open about, we're all thinking these things. We all are interested. We all have these desires. How can we be authentic about it too? And what is the Bible saying about it? So it was pretty cool.
It's fantastic. And I have seen the church as a whole, referring to all of Christianity, becoming more open to having these conversations and recognizing the need and starting to pay attention to some of the statistics that researchers like you and I and others are, pointing out, that we actually have more distress and dysfunction regarding sexuality within the church than we do outside of it. That's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Especially since I feel like if we're talking about spirituality, it's such a mind-body experience. And so to shut off that sexual piece, I feel like you're eliminating a huge part of what the body experiences and repressing a lot of, what is can be so connecting for a partner and for yourself, understanding your body and allowing for you to get in tune with that piece is such a spiritual element, and bringing in God in the Bible and incorporating those pieces can just enhance that even more if we look at the right parts too, or not the right parts, but different elements of the parts that maybe aren't spoken about as much.
Yeah, from my conceptualization, I don't think you can take away your spirituality from your sexuality and vice versa. I mean, you just can't. You're bringing it with you no matter where you go. So even for my clients who, say that they're atheists, that's still informing their sexual worldview. And that's just something that I personally find fascinating.
Yeah.
So tell us some of the common, issues that you work with couples on. What are some of the things that you see most often? I think everyone is just so curious as to what happens on a sex therapist couch.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sex therapy, I'll find for women specifically, I was so amazed by this, coming in with sexual pain, sexual discomfort, which and I'm sure you notice too, is just not talked about as much. And so I'll have a lot of couples who come in and say sex isn't working, or there's something wrong with her, it's in my head, when there's actually some physical pieces that aren't working well, maybe because of the pelvic floor and the way that it's functioning. And so helping clients get really into their body and understand about the muscles or the arousal system or foreplay and how our arousal system works. But then also trying to, if I'm thinking about it from a spiritual perspective, I'll have clients who, it's pretty normal to have clients who come in who are virgins when they get married and have these sexual pains and not understand them and think, it's supposed to hurt the first time, but why is it still hurting a year later?
Yes.
And so trying to help them work through, how do I explore and experience and get in tune with my body, and how do I become present and grounded with my partner to experience those things and try and combat maybe some of the anxiety pieces? How do I incorporate fantasy work? Fantasy, I think, it can be associated with maybe porn. And so that can be such a negative word.
So tricky.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes I'll assign homework like go read Song of Solomon together
Yes, that is erotic, especially once you start understanding some of the euphemisms. I never looked at pomegranate the same again after a pastor said that that was another word for a vagina.
Exactly. Yeah, there's this one section where I love that it's like the guy speaking, then the girl speaking. But there's a one section where the woman goes and is bragging about her partner to the women of Jerusalem. And she's basically like undressing him with her words and in her mind, fantasizing about him to her friends, to her girlfriends. And so it's in there. And how can we then access that and allow that to be a healthy thing between you and yourself, and accessing that pleasure and that sensation and that arousal, but then also accessing that with your partner too, and allowing and giving permission for that.
Right. So I have a burning question for you then. If you were suddenly in charge of being able to provide sexual education for the church, what are some of the, encouragements that you would wish to see in there? What are some things that you wish like pastors would be able to talk about or bring other educators in to describe? I mean, fantasy, like you said, is a huge thing. And for so many of the individuals and couples that I've worked with that have come out of a biblical worldview, it's hard to turn off when they've been groomed or turn on when they've been groomed their entire lives to turn it off.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed is, I don't know if it's because of the abstinence messages, but coming at single sexuality from a place of not suppressing or repressing our sexual desires, but utilizing that in a creative means. So whether that's through dance or through art or through hiking or something. So still accessing it, but utilizing it in a way that's still creative and is an expression of your sexuality versus saying, I can't feel these things. I think that is trying to switch a mindset to that would be very helpful. And then when you're in a relationship and if you're trying to abstain, let's say, and then you get married, that is there and you're able to access that versus now I have to kind of unleash it, which could take a while, since I've locked it down for so long.
Yes, they almost don't even have access to their body and feelings at all, I found. I think that's a wonderful idea. I'd not even thought of that before. Yeah. I've worked with college students, sometimes undergrads, teaching undergrad psychology courses. And what I found fascinating and terrifying at the same time is this entire generation, typically under 25 now, that have such high STIs and STD rates, at least here in Florida. Because their entire generation got really wonky sex ed. And so especially in the Christian church, they were taught, no sex before marriage, which is fine, except that a lot of them try to do anything but. And realizing that we have a generation for whom HPV has surpassed smoking as the number one cause of oral and throat cancers because of oral sex, because they were somehow bought into this message that it wasn't real sex. And so it was okay then. I love what you're saying about being able to give them other outlets, which would still actually help all of their levels of being flourish without dampening that down. Give them other things to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think that is something that I've been learning throughout the years. I've been a sex therapist for, I think, 6 years now. And that's something that I continue to see is it's been shut down, but we don't want to shut it down. That's unhealthy too. How can we still utilize it, but in a way that is in a direction that you're wanting to still, keep your abstinence sacred while also accessing that piece. I think another part, that I see this across the board, is just having someone model what a conversation looks like around sex with somebody else. And that I find I could just have one session with so many clients to say, how can I get you all to talk to each other? And then things are so much better. But I think some of those obvious pieces aren't as obvious because we weren't modeled that. We weren't taught, how do we have this conversation? How do we practice these words or use these words? Because it can feel really vulnerable and it can feel too intimate or awkward or embarrassing. And so how do we help teach people how to have the conversation with each other and to be open and to receive that and to feel received in a safe environment where we can then explore and experiment and have that deeper connection with each other. But I think the conversation is I know communicating is overstated sometimes, but it's overstated for a reason too, especially around the sex talk with your partner, with your friends in general. And I think maybe that's what a lot of us are trying to do, is normalize the conversation, because otherwise, if we're not talking about it, there's this message that it's not okay or something's wrong about it.
Yes, I think that's where stigma and shame pops up so frequently. And I think that's where Christianity gets a bad rap. And it's an unfortunate one and a false one, because it's not true across the board as with anything. But I love what you're saying about having these conversations. So what are some of the things that you tell clients? Because I know a lot of my listeners have grown up in households where they didn't get any sex ed at home or at church, maybe, minor ones at school. And suddenly, and what I've noticed sad too is that even in a lot of premarital counseling courses, they discuss the mechanics of it and that it's okay by God's standard. Now go forth and procreate, but how? how do you start telling a partner what you want and you don't want, especially when you've been groomed to, quote, be a lady and be chaste and virtuous? So what are some practical tips that you might give people?
So one of the things that I've found too is that people just felt embarrassed saying the words that they wanted to utilize. And so they didn't want to talk about it because just the words in general were difficult for them to say. So I'll have crowds of people shout out vulva and penis. That's what I did with this church of 30,000 people.
Yes.
And shouted out.
I wish you'd had a GoPro on your head when that happened.
It was a great moment for me. It felt fun. So I'll have clients write down a list of words that feel difficult. And then maybe it's as simple as, I say simple, but it could be difficult. Going into the bathroom or wherever you are and utilizing one of those words every day, or utilizing it in a sentence with your partner. And clients will come back and giggle and say, oh, that was really fun. And so even in that sense, you're creating this sexual excitement and playfulness because you're doing something that's out of your box and creative, that's still engaging a sexual conversation. So something as maybe what I would say basic as starting to practice the language. And then, of course, looking at understanding your body, like taking a mirror and looking at your vulva, because a lot of women who've been married for 20 plus years, I find out, have never actually seen their vulvas before.
I know, shocking. Yeah. I met women in their 60s who haven't had an orgasm. It's just so sad.
Yeah. So trying to ask, do you know your body? Do you know where things are, or what pleases you, or what feels good? And have them start exploring a little bit. So like the app OMG Yes has been really great because it's not necessary. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but
I have. But some of our listeners probably haven't.
Yeah, so it's a tool that an app that you can use to understand the different pleasure principles or the different ways that pleasure can be experienced in the vulva area. And I like it because a lot of my Christian women feel like they have more permission to look at that and understand their body in that way than like porn, for instance. Right. Since it's more of a somewhat more clinical experience in understanding one's body, but exploring yourself, what is that like? And then having a conversation with I'm talking a lot about women, but it's the same for men too, or partners, whatever your partner looks like. And having a conversation, I'll say, go out to dinner, or when your kids go to bed, set up something that is special and out of the norm, and only talk about the sexual conversation. And I'll even give some questions, because people will say, I don't know what to ask. So I'll hand out some questions of, what has been your favorite sexual experience? What do you enjoy? What is difficult for you? What do you fear about sex? What do you want to explore? What do you fantasize about? And these questions are interesting because what I find is that some couples will have assumed certain things about their partner, given their past partners or given what they've seen in the movies. And so being able to be open and having this dialogue is an intimate expression of being known and knowing from the sexual perspective. So those are the ones that I pull out pretty often for
That's
clients.
fantastic. Now, knowing that you do work as a Christian sex therapist, what do you do when a couple comes in and one of them has fantasies or wants to do something that the other one's not comfortable with, or that the church as a whole might find to be really taboo? How do you handle that delicately?
So I try and be open to understanding where they're both coming from and then having them express that to each other. What is it about that specific fantasy that you like? How can we incorporate it that might be beneficial to you both? And then from the other perspective, what is it that's holding you back from that place? Is there a way that we can utilize something within that you do like? So sometimes it's about changing the fantasy a little bit, but also what I find is if something within the sexual relationship takes away from the partnership within the sex, then I try and get away from that. If we can't focus on each other, or if it's too much about the fantasy or too much about what I don't like about the fantasy, then we've lost what I say is somewhat of the purpose of the sexual connection. And so I try and be open and have them have a dialogue on how can we create a fantasy together that incorporates both sides without totally saying we can't do this or we can, you have to do this. So I try and make it more of a team approach than a black and white thing.
I love that because it's all about increasing the couple's intimacy and comfortability with one another.
Yeah, exactly.
So Emma, what are some favorite resources? You already mentioned, the app. Are there anything else that you find yourself commonly recommending to clients?
Commonly recommending?
Books or...
I mean, I love Brene Brown's work just from the vulnerability and intimacy. She's so great at accessing that piece for all of us. I wish she could just sit on my shoulder and just whisper into my ear all day.
She is the vulnerability queen. I probably would take a lot more risks if I had a little Brene on my shoulder. Yeah.
Right. One thing that I do, and I talk about this a lot, is I have clients create jars together and they both throw in areas that they want to explore or things that they like sexually. And then their partner goes and pulls that activity and creates an environment and then initiates specifically for that partner. And so it's a way of saying, this is how I understand that you feel most loved or sensual or sexual, and I want to provide that to you. And so it's a way of creating spontaneity in a scheduled way, but then your partner is initiating something that they know you'll like. And that has been so helpful for my clients and creative and fun and playful when things can just feel really stagnant or complacent. And so that's a tool that I utilize all the time.
That is brilliant. I love that. That's a very tangible way of increasing what I would call red hot monogamy. It's just, it allows for that, as you said, the playfulness, but it's also very intimacy building because it gives, the partner that's receiving a chance to feel, very loved. But at the same time, it's allowing both partners to work on initiating sex, which is what I find in my clients to be one of the hardest things ever.
Yeah.
They've got this desire, but, darn it, if it's not a very difficult thing for them to let their partner know that they'd like to play.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I like for it to be a secret so the partner doesn't know what's in the jar. And it's a way, what I find too is that people feel more aroused. I don't know what the empirical data says on this, but feel more aroused when I know that I'm arousing you. When this is something that I know you're going to enjoy, that makes me feel really even more into my body and more sexual, or feel more aroused because I know that you're getting excitement out of this.
Oh, the research is spot on with you on that. There's a really good book called The Erotic Mind, and it talks about all the different reasons why the brain responds to such things like that. And I call that the healthy side of objectification. And I think that that's something that, again, the church could do better at talking about, because we push so hard on respecting one another that oftentimes my clients end up with what I call the hooker-housewife dichotomy. And they have a hard time being able to either make themselves the object of their partner's desire or see their partner that way. They've almost overly made them too chaste in their head.
Oh,
This is my partner who is so beautiful and I love, the mother of my children, and they stop seeing her as a woman and sexual creature.
Mm-hmm. They separate the two.
Mm-hmm. Just a little too far. I'm like, no, it's a both and perspective. You love her, she's beautiful, and you can want to sleep with her.
Exactly. Oh, that's such a good point. Wait, what did you call that?
The hooker-housewife dichotomy. Because they say, well, I wouldn't want, to look at her the way that those sleazy women on television or in porn, those are the women that do quote unquote naughty things.
Yeah.
And so what I love about your message is it's about normalizing it and making it feel safe and fun for everyone.
Exactly. One of the biggest pieces that I find with my clients is I don't want it to be scheduled. I want it to be spontaneous all the time. But Esther Perel, I just
my
was
fave.
watching, right?
Oh my gosh.
I
yes.
can watch it. Yeah, she should be on my other shoulder.
Yes. Oh yes. I give her book to everyone and her TED Talks.
Yes. Yeah, I was listening to a webinar with her and Terry Real, and she was saying, just like if you want to prepare a really nice meal, you have to schedule that with your partner. You have to go and buy the food for that. You have to take the time to prepare it and then take the time to sit down and enjoy it. And she's saying the same thing has to be true with your erotic side and wanting to express that and experience that with your partner. As much as we want it to be, all the stars to align and the universe for it to be spontaneous, it really needs to be planned and prepared so that you can enjoy it, so that you can sit down and enjoy it too. Even though like the quickies and the spontaneity are still fun for it to for us to have
both.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was
saw that webinar. I loved that one. Yes. And what I saw someone else add to that idea, and it's something that I recommend clients do, is afterwards, after like you would have a fine dinner, you might send a thank you note or a text message saying, I really appreciated this about it. And it's another way of including that conversation with couples, helping them branch. And as Esther talks about, when you do that, it allows both of us to extend the desire and the enjoyment of it much longer. And don't just say, I had fun last night. Say, just like you would at a dinner party, I really enjoyed the way you set the table. I loved this special touch. And so being able to tell your lover, I really liked the way that you kissed me here. And when you did this, it sent me over the edge.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll have clients have a debrief session, not necessarily like as soon as
in the moment, break out the clipboards,
which some clients do. So we have to talk through that. But
a little too awkward.
How can we address, what was working really well? What would you have liked different next time? But to be able to say that technique that you did, was amazing. I didn't know that was possible for me to feel this way. And when and so that just gives some more in-depth feedback for that person to know, oh, okay, I will continue to do X, Y, and Z, or I will maybe not position myself in this way, or she doesn't, or he doesn't care for this. So yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like
and
having
then
this
taking it
session.
personally.
Yeah, that's something important that we've worked with clients on. But yeah, the conversation is so big, and just being able to create that space, that vulnerable, intimate space to have that language for you and your partner to have that dialogue, I think is just as important as the act itself.
Right. I think there's a beautiful paradox in that sex is something that we should have reverence for and take it seriously, but at the same time, not take ourselves so seriously in it. It's just, I tell them it's like naked playtime or semi-naked, whatever you feel like wearing in the moment. Like you guys go on dates, we talk, we have fun in this way, and sex is another way that we do it. It doesn't have to be this huge, scary thing.
Yeah. Show up for the experience, not knowing what to expect. Don't show up thinking, okay, we're going to have step 1, 2, and 3. Yes. How can I just be there and be present and experience whatever I'm going to experience? Yeah.
Which is fantastic, because then it takes the performance anxiety down a huge bit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness, Emma, you are such a joy. I feel like we could have like 12 more of these sessions, and maybe we will have to, but thank you.
Over sex.
Seriously. Thank you so much for being on. Where can our listeners find you if they want to look you up?
Yeah, so my website is emma-schmidt.com. And then we also have a Facebook page right now where we post some vlogs and other fun videos and share other people's wisdom for the world.
Fantastic. And I saw that some of your therapists actually work online too through VC.
Yeah, what our integrative wellness sex coach, she does VC and is amazing. So she is able to see people, all over the world, throughout the states, and provides a 15-minute free consultation so that you can try out the online component, because it can feel a little scary, I think, just not knowing. It's a somewhat newer concept, but she provides this 15-minute free test the waters out piece, which is great. And then we'll have another sex therapist and I are going to be launching a podcast as well called SexRx in March, which will be fun and educational.
I am so excited.
Normalizing. So it's cool to have another podcast like yours out there for the world.
Yes. Bridge all the gaps. Exactly. By our powers combined, everyone will be having better orgasms is my goal.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Emma.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to the Undressing the Spirit podcast. I pray you found some inspiration and titillation today. As always, I am forever grateful for 5-star reviews, comments, and subscriptions on iTunes and anywhere else you may be listening to this broadcast. Please note the information provided is not meant to convey professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you could use such services, I highly recommend seeking them out from someone you trust. To get in touch with me personally, please check out ariatherapy.com or talesfromatrapezoid.com. Until